My name is Brian Carroll. I'm Assistant Secretary for Climate Action and Environment. I'd like to take this opportunity to again thank the Taoiseach and the Ministers for their very valuable contribution this morning. So our first discussion this morning is going to be on engaging communities on the climate change challenge. Laura is going to moderate proceedings, and I will hand over to Laura now and let her introduce the members of the panel. Thanks, Laura.
Thank you very much, Brian. And I suppose it's a great honour to be here this morning, and it's great to see such a high level of interest and engagement from a wide range of members of the Cabinet. I think that's certainly the first time in my many years' experience in the climate field to see such a range of ministers all together talking about climate issues. A couple of, I suppose, musings in advance of the first panel discussion. And what I was really interested in when we saw the video this morning was, I suppose, the mention of climate action being more than a goal, but being a way of life. And I think that's something to me that is really important, in that climate action can't be seen as an afterthought or an add-on, or it actually will never be successful. It'll always be something we'll do at some stage into the future. And again, that's why I was so positive to hear about the investment this morning. Minister Donoghue's comments with regard to decisions and that decisions need to be integrated. Again, I think we're hearing the word integrated a lot. And those decisions, whether it be planning and transport, whether it be climate and air policy, do need to be thought through, do need to be integrated to ensure that we spend money wisely and get the results that we want, rather than unintended consequences of poor decisions that we only see the results of into the future. And again, a lot of talk about the moral imperative to take action, and I don't think we should underestimate that requirement and responsibility on all of us to reflect on our responsibilities to take action in this area as citizens of Ireland, but also citizens of the EU. So the scale of the transition to achieve the national policy objective of a competitive, low-carbon and climate-resilient and environmentally sustainable economy does present a huge challenge, as was highlighted this morning. It's not only a government challenge, but it is a wider society challenge. It presents us, though, with really difficult discussion and decision, because climate change is a long-term global issue. And it is always difficult to get people then interested in something that's long-term and global, where our natural instinct is to be looking at the short-term and the local. So again, how do we engage people in taking action now that in many instances we may only see the benefit of in the future years? So that's an issue that we don't only see in Ireland, but we see at European level and we see internationally as well. So this morning event, the Empowering Communities for Climate Action as its main theme, and this first panel that I'm delighted to be moderating will seek to explore the challenges and opportunities for engaging communities for behavioural change. I think it's also important to recognise there's a lot of important activities and initiatives that are already in place, whether that be the Sustainable Energy Communities Network that is supported by the SCAI, EPA initiatives that we work in partnership with organisations such as Untashka, UNESCO, local authorities in supporting communities to be more sustainable, the public participation networks, also, and the Climate Action Regional Offices that the Minister referenced, and of course the National Dialogue on Climate Action that's commencing this weekend. So, the first of this morning's panels will explore this topic by looking at how to build on existing initiatives to promote better communication and engagement between government, both central and local, and communities about the decisions that we must take as a society. So the panel, the aim is to explore how to ensure that individuals and communities are active participants in the transition to a low-carbon, climate-resilient society. We want to also consider what structures will actually deliver robust public and stakeholder engagement in climate policy. And when we talk about communities, I think the other thing we'll need to remember here is that communities aren't one just homogenous group. They are made of individual people with individual aspirations, desires and interests as well. So we'll also explore the national dialogue on climate action and how this can best generate awareness and motivation to act. So we've got a great panel this morning. We've got Justin Byrne from the Environmental Pillar. We have Liam Murtagh, who's the chair of the Castleblaney Sustainable Energy Group. We have Elaine Nevin, who's the National Director of Eco-UNESCO, and we have Anna Davies of Trinity, all very well known to most of you, I would say, in the audience. So first of all, before we get into questions, just for 1 or 2 minutes, and that's all, because we are limited in time, I'm just going to ask each of the panel members to do short introductory remarks. So I'm going to start with yourself, Anna.
Thanks, Laura. I hope everyone can hear me okay. Great. Thanks, Jim, for the back there giving me the nod. I'm delighted to be here. And just before I start with some opening remarks, I do want to acknowledge that investment in action on climate change has been ongoing through various mechanisms for a long period. This is a very welcome statement today, but organisations such as the Environmental Protection Agency have been investing in research around climate action for many years, and I have been lucky enough to be involved with projects such as the Consensus Project funded by the Environmental Protection Agency, which looked at consumption, environment and sustainability. Likewise, Science Foundation Ireland have recently supported the development of Enable, which is empowering citizens to engage with smart and sustainable cities. And equally at the European level, the European Research Council are already funding action in this area, such as a project called ShareCity, which is looking at the sustainability potential of ICT-mediated urban food sharing. And I suppose my main comment before we kick off is something that responds to really the point that the Taoiseach made in his speech, where he said that economic growth is needed to fund our climate actions. But I would raise the point that if economic growth is increasing our climate change emissions, which seems to be currently the case, we have not decoupled economic growth from the environment, then we will simply be running to stand still if we don't go beyond this perspective. We need to address the elephant in the room, which is unsustainable consumption. It is the mother of all environmental issues, including climate change. And this will, as Laura said, require a change in behaviour, a reflection on the way that we consume, to think about doing things differently, doing things better. And this will need some psychological adaptation to where we are currently. We will also need changes in our decision-making processes, both in the parameters of those decision-making processes and also in terms of the participants. And I think the Citizens' Assembly, which took place in regards to climate change, provides an illustrative experiment in the kinds of ways that we might engage more participants in the future. So we need greater attention and support for low-carbon and no-carbon innovations and stronger action against high-carbon activities. So the Climate Action Fund is very, very positive and it's a welcome investment. But already there are innovative actions taking place. Transitions towns amongst our communities, the Rediscovery Centre here in Dublin, in Ballymun, and these kinds of activities need to be scaled out and scaled up, not in a piecemeal way in terms of annual funding, but long-term commitment and support, and I hope we'll be able to discuss these issues further.
Anna, thank you very much. Justin.
Okay, I'm part of the Environmental Pillar, and the Environmental Pillar is a network of national environmental organisations, but one of the things we've been working on for a long time is public participation networks, and before that on the community forum structures. And my colleague Michael Ewing was part of the working group that proposed the structures for the public participation networks back in 2013. The PPNs, or the public participation networks, they're set up, they're running in most cases, and they're doing very well. There's about 11,000 community groups registered with them. They've nominated about 800 people to over 300 different local authority and council committees. And that's last year's figures. It's improving every year. There are more and more community groups joining and getting involved. And one of the things that the PPNs have been tasked to do is to create a wellbeing statement. And I'm very lucky to be part of a project that the EPA funded to pilot this in 4 different counties. What the wellbeing statement does, it looks to produce a statement of what's needed by the current and the future generations in a community. And we look at 6 domains to do that: the social and community development, environmental and sustainability, environment and resources, health, values, culture and meaning, and participation, democracy and good governance. And between those 6 domains and across them, because they're all interlinked, almost every aspect of society's assets, hopes, needs, requirements are covered. And in doing this, we bring the 3 colleges of the PPNs together: the community and voluntary sector, the social inclusion sector and the environmental sector. And we ask them to think about this vision for the future, the vision for the future of their community. And the shared wellbeing statement that they create is the glue. It becomes the glue that will hold the PPN network together. It's the reference points for the representatives on those committees that they're nominated to. It's the starting point for community responses to public consultations and county consultations. And it's a really useful resource for local authorities. But when we go out and we meet people, and I see 1 or 2 people here who've been part of the pilot, when we go to meet the people working on the statement, when we talk about all of the issues that are facing communities, climate change is always to the fore, and that's out of all the issues that are facing communities. And the thing that I find is that people, they already get the climate change issue. Whether it's social inclusion groups or men's sheds or Pavy Point, they're all there telling me about the importance of acting on climate change now. They really do understand the urgency and the issue. The communities, the PPNs, they all get this. They understand the size, the urgency of the problem, and they want to solve it. They really do want to play their part. But one of the things they want is they want leadership. They want leadership from all parts of the government in dealing with this. And given that leadership, I think communities really will happily play their part in tackling climate change.
Justin, thank you. Elaine.
Thanks, Laura. I suppose maybe first of all, I think just in recognition for the space that we're in today, this used to be run by Cultivate, who was an NGO, and I suppose for me there's something about that NGO that brought communities together and brought people together, and I know that it was a space where in 2004 we brought together for the first national strategy on education for sustainable development at the very start of the UN decade of education for sustainable development. This was the space that was used, so I suppose it's very fitting that maybe it's back here today, and that I think that maybe at a much kind of higher level, we're getting that kind of integrated approach from government, I think, which is very much needed. And I think is very much welcome. In terms of my own perspective, I mean, I'm an educator, a former secondary school teacher. I've worked with young people for many years. I'm the director of an organisation called Eco UNESCO. We're an environmental education youth organisation. We're working with over 10,000 young people annually across the whole of Ireland. And I'm also part of and chairing the National Dialogue on Climate Action and the advisory group there. I suppose in terms of some of the key challenges that I see in empowering communities towards climate action. I mean, I'm talking very much from my own perspective in terms of working directly with young people. When we work with young people, I think it's very, very challenging engaging them. But I think when you engage communities and you engage people in action work and you give them the power, and I suppose it's about empowering people, what happens is very, I suppose, inspirational, and it can be incredibly powerful. I think that when you think about communities, you're thinking about a disparate group of people. And I think that when you, and maybe from a government perspective, the idea of empowering groups of people and empowering communities, it will be messy. And I think that you have to be ready for that. What might happen, because that could be organic. So it's organic and it's coming from the ground up. And I think it's very, very important that you recognise that will happen, and that you have maybe a ground up approach and a grassroots approach. I think the other thing is this idea of moving people from awareness to action. Because people know stuff doesn't mean they change their behaviour. There's been so much research that's been done in terms of building awareness and knowledge within people. It's really important that people are aware. It's really important that we do build knowledge within people, but to assume that that's going to change and going to move people to action isn't a correct assumption, because people don't always take, I suppose, that rational approach, and often it can be much more of an emotional response that's needed. I think when you were talking about engaging people in societies and engaging different people in communities, I think the tendency in communities can be always to go to the leaders within the communities. Can we try to engage others? We need to be getting to the mainstream, and we need to be getting to others within the communities. I mean, from our own perspective, we work with young people. 33% of our population are young people. There are over 700,000 young people between the ages of 10 and 25 in the country. They're a significant target group and a significant stakeholder group. And I think it's really important that when we talk about young people, we're not talking about them in the future. I think young people, when you talk to them, they get very annoyed and kind of they feel that why are we always kind of being passed over this saying that it's the future? Well, actually, it's the present. And I think a lot of young people have very innovative things to say, and I think it's really important that they're listened to. I think the other thing is that maybe it's not just about the individual; it's about the group. And we need to be looking not just at individuals, but at groups of people as well. And to look at kind of innovative ways. There's a lot of work in the whole area of peer education and peer influence. People are influenced by each other. Others. I think it's really important, the building of trust in communities. Local groups need to trust the message, but they also need to trust the messenger. So maybe we're looking at target groups, we're looking at different groups and communities, and different people delivering different messages to different target groups. I think that's really important. And I think balancing our message is also really important. Climate change is huge, and it's very, very frightening. And I think if it is, when it is so frightening, passing that message, maybe we need to consider how we balance the urgency and balance the, I suppose, catastrophic consequences of climate change, because we know it is, with actually a message of hope as well. I was reading, I think something, I was reading an article and they were saying about Martin Luther King. He didn't say, I have a nightmare, it's basically I have a dream. I mean, we need to be looking at kind of, how do we kind of try to build hope when we're looking maybe into the future and maybe it doesn't look so hopeful from a climate perspective.
Thank you very much, Elaine. And I think that piece of hope rather than always doom and gloom is something that, yes, absolutely, we need to think about. Liam, from your perspective.
Liam Murtagh is my name. I'm from Castleblaney. I suppose, like a lot, maybe people in the audience here are maybe involved in this sort of work on a voluntary basis in communities, small towns and rural areas. And I agree in a way that I suppose there's you mentioned about the heart, the emotional level, but there's the economic and financial dimension to it as well, in terms of you have to reach people through say, the route we are moving is through the energy route, the Sustainable Energy Communities route. Castleblaney is about 3,500 of a population, has suffered through the Troubles and the economic downturn, but on the positive, there's a lot of community activity, and this is typical of Ireland, where you have GAA and you have local development associations. We have a community enterprise centre, we have a large theatre in the town, all as a result of community action, as opposed to government-led or local authority-led, but supported by them. So for example, there's a Tidy Towns group and there's a regeneration group, and a few of us got together and we had this conference on sustainable waste, and the whole idea of energy came up, and then it was mentioned about this SEAI, Sustainable Energy Communities Programme, which is a new programme. So we linked in with Ruth Buggy in Dundalk. It was very helpful, and we set up a Sustainable Energy Community group in Castleblinny with all the local stakeholders, local authority. We have Kingspan on board to provide corporate sponsorship. So, and immediately we linked in with Louth County Council, and we did 2 energy upgrades in the town, one in a community enterprise centre and one in the Aontas Theatre. So that gives a taste for actual activity. And then we set about our energy auditing in the town, professional auditing, supported by funding from SEAI. And we are currently developing an energy master plan. But there in February, we had an energy show, a local energy show, where we had 26 exhibitors in a sort of a room the size of this here. And about 300 people came along looking at energy saving, renewables and funding support. And it was led by ourselves with support from SEI and other local bodies, the County Council and so on. So it's something that could be done in any town, and it's practical, and it's a way in which people can save money. We're now moving on to year 2, where we'll be looking at the projects identified in the Energy Master Plan and tackling them through what's called the BEC, the Better Energy Communities Programme, which has been set up recently for sustainable energy community groups. It's not competitive now. If you reach a certain criteria, community groups will be funded. But there's loads of challenges and along the way, and we can talk about them later on. But it's not an easy route, but it's a doable route. And I think Ireland is great in terms of community action, and I think this climate agenda, or we should call it low carbon agenda, I think, should be stitched in to that whole community sector in a very close way with local authorities and so on. And there's a few other little groups that I've been linked in with like the Cool Planet Champions, which is supported by the EPA, the Antashka Climate Ambassador Programme, which you get a mention as well, Cultivate, excellent work. Davy Phillip from Cultivate was up in Monaghan last week on the Convergence Festival with the transition group that I'm involved in, and Spark Change, which is an excellent initiative by the Wheel, which pulls all of these sustainable communities initiatives together. So just in case we forget about them, just to give them a mention.
And I suppose what strikes me talking to all of you is there's a huge amount actually happening, and I think sometimes we might focus on what isn't happening rather than what is happening. And interesting there, Liam, you're talking about things not necessarily having to be led by national or local government, but supported by having those supports in place. And now, while the audience start getting their questions and thoughts together, maybe just one or two from myself. And Anna, one thing that struck me was you were talking about the scaling out and up of activities. And I'm conscious that Minister Donoghue was also saying, yes, there's expenditure, but it's not only about expenditure, and the challenge is broader than that. And maybe just in the context of scaling up and out and engagement of communities, there is, of course, the money element. But what are the other things that you see will be important in actually driving some of those activities from local up?
Yeah, so I think it's a combination. From an academic perspective, we love our theories, but the application of theory in practice is something else. But certainly from the research, it's suggesting that what you need is an alignment and a combining of supportive rules, so regulations, tools, so systems, devices, which can support action, as well as the skills and understandings, which is all about the information and awareness campaigns. And when you have all of those things aligned and combined according to a similar message, that's when things become embedded and become habitual, as you were mentioning, in terms of creating, the kind of needed adaptational behaviour change that we require. And certainly in terms of transitioning, there are lots of niche activities that can bubble up and affect the regimes, the dominant ways of doing things. And I think we're having the pressure from the landscape, the kind of dominant broad changes around climate change, and we have lots of examples of niche activities, but we need both the pressures from the top, the climate change and other agendas that we know about, and also these grassroots activities kind of working together to really affect change in what is fairly resilient regimes that we have at present.
Thank you. And then just Justin, you were talking about in the context of engaging communities, that your feedback is that kind of communities want leadership, and I suppose the question for you is, what does that leadership look like? Because we can talk about, leadership, but in the context of the communities and the PPNs and engaging, what does that leadership, do you think, look like?
I think it's about planning. We've seen a lot of things happen in the past where they seem to just happen. And there was no concerted planning effort, and there was no long-term planning. And the great thing about this 2040 is that it is at least long-term planning. It's really important that we set out a vision and steps on how we achieve it. Now, we can argue the details another time, but that is the sort of thing that people want. They want to actually know that the government is behind this, that people actually believe that something is going to be done about it. And when they see that leadership, when they see that those first steps being taken, they will very happily, I think, play their part and take a much more active part in it when they believe it's going to happen.
Okay. Now, I might just turn to the audience, and I see a hand up already towards the back there. And if I can ask, when you're asking a question, if you could state who you are and the organisation you're from, and also if we can focus on the engaging communities for a behavioural change piece and link the questions and comments to that. So maybe there's a microphone just coming there at the back there, hopefully.
Good morning. My name is Eugene Conlan from the Dunleer Sustainable Energy Community in County Louth. I'd just firstly like to thank the Department for this very important meeting in the launch programme. And I'd also like to give due recognition to what Minister Donoghue and the others have said about the importance of this cross-government approach, because sometimes we would accuse perhaps different government departments of not talking with each other, and it's very clearly there's leadership being shown from the very top that this is a cross-government initiative, so it's very important. Could I just address the issues around Justin's point about communities being interested? I think that is very true, and the PPN network is a very important network. But one of the other speakers did make the point that being educated doesn't necessarily mean you'll take action. And I think that's a very key point. And Liam mentioned this earlier on. At the moment, if we look at the 180 sustainable energy communities around Ireland, most of them, in fact probably all of them, are driven by volunteers. And there's only so much volunteerism can do. So I think that point earlier that Liam made is we've got to, and through this initiative, that has to be funded. There has to be support there to help that volunteerism. That's one thing. But I think the second thing, and this is just my last point, is I think it is crucial to have an end-to-end solution. So from education right through to installation. And we in County Louth, we're in a very good position, thanks be to God. We've partnered with a community organisation in Cork called North Cork Enterprises. And to date, we have retrofitted 200 premises in County Louth and North Dublin to make them a lot more efficient with phenomenal results. And we've also brought education to 400 people around Ireland. So I think that end-to-end solution, it's not just about retrofitting premises and it's not just about education. It must be an end-to-end solution, education to retrofit. Thank you.
Lampe, consultant on climate and energy efficiency, and my business is Sustainale. My question, I think it's great we've got a sort of top-down view and a bottom-up view this morning, that's great. Dealing with people and talking about what we can do about climate change, wondering, does the panel have any views on, sometimes policies don't appear to be aligned at government level. So, we have our climate change targets, maybe on the other hand, we're going to grow our herd number. So from a citizen point of view, it can often appear to be a conflict in policies. And does that maybe stymie action to inhibit it? So how can we make sure that all policies are aligned, that it gives the government that added credibility that the citizen can follow? Just concerned about how we actually buy in at a practical and emotional level. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm going to there's just another gentleman here, and then I might come back to the panel on that.
I'm Edmund Grace, Director of People Talk, Citizen Jury Shaping Government. I just want to talk about a report issued recently by The Wheel on enabling citizens a two-way street. And the key to it is that we can't enable citizens if we don't enable public servants, especially at ground level, to interact with them. So on the one hand, the way that People Talk works is there's a jury of citizens, there's a panel of public servants. We've done this in County Galway. Public servants are very good at detecting, they're just ordinary people, if you like to use that word. They can see the problems and understand them from inside the structures. The citizens can bring fresh ideas, which they did in Galway, and resulting in a very specific decision-ready proposal, which was implemented by both the County Council and the Department of Social Protection. So it's a very effective means of getting things done on the ground, of getting ordinary people, seen as ordinary people, interacting with public servants at ground level. It's a very rich formula. That's all I want to say.
Now, I might just maybe start with Elaine and Liam in this instance, just on this concept of that engagement between public servants and citizens, and I suppose, getting the ideas of citizens for change. And also, as Raoul was saying, does it make it more difficult to engage with citizens when potentially they see conflicting policies? I'll start with yourself, Elaine, and then Annie.
I mean, I think in terms of the conflicting policies, I think yes. I mean, I think that, I suppose research would show that, it's very important to build trust. And I think there has to be this, a trusting relationship between the citizen and government. So, yes, you want to have policy alignment as much as possible. I mean, that's that. So I think that can be difficult, and I think that I suppose it's what I said earlier in terms of the message and the messengers. You need to, I suppose, have clear messages for people. I think where you have conflicting messages, people can see the conflict that's there. I know we work with young people, we work with teenagers, and anyone who works with teenagers knows how honest teenagers are. And I think they will say to you straight away, well, we can actually see that there's a difficulty between one target and another. So I think it is really important that we're looking at trying to give clear, honest messages to citizens. And I think that, and I think that's when, and if there is a problem with trying to align your policies, maybe it's trying to be honest and say there's a problem trying to align these policies. At least that's being honest to your people, and I think they will come back and say, okay, well, look, how do we try to work this out together? How can, if there is a an agricultural target on one side and we have targets for climate change on the other, yeah, we can see that there's a conflict there, but how do we try to work it out together? Because at the end of the day, your government is there and it wants to do the best for the country as well. And I suppose in a way you have to, and if you want to get your citizens on board, you need to be honest with them. So I mean, something like the National Dialogue on Climate Action, which we'll be having the meeting this weekend in Athlone, where it will be an opportunity for citizens to input, and the idea with the dialogue is that it's and the one that we're holding on Saturday is a pilot, so we're going to see how it works. It's for them to feed up into the policy process as well from that ground up approach. So so I suppose we have to see what happens with that.
So that again, that concept of public servants, the system, for want of a better word, engaging with.
Absolutely, I think the system. And I think I think that strengthens our democracy where we have that happening. I think it strengthens where you have our public servants linking and listening. And I think it also has to be really listening. You know, I don't think it can be, you know, we don't want something that's tokenistic. You want something that's real, and I think citizens will appreciate that. And I think citizens, if you want more action, I know we work with young people all the time through a Young Environmentalist Awards program, one of our programs that we run. But we're always promoting youth-led action, and youth-led action is about young people coming up with, you know, identifying a problem, coming up with a solution, carrying out an action project and telling others about it. It's a basic kind of framework. But the really important thing about that is that they identify the issue, they identify the solution, and then they're allowed to act on that solution. Now, I would say that that's from a young person perspective. That could be transposed, and that's transposed into a community perspective. That, you know, you need to have community-led action, but they need to identify the issues and come up with the solutions.
I might turn to Liam, and then I know there's other questions there I'm going to go to.
Just 2 points, really. Maybe just as regards Eugene's point about the how to put it, the volunteerism and supporting volunteerism, which is really important. How to put it, I think there, in those programs, in implementing these programs like SECs and so on, or BECs, there's a huge professional expertise needed, and it's very hard in terms of governance, in terms of financial administration, for groups to do it. So in a sense, you're probably talking about, in the main, like, it'd be easier for local authorities, local development companies and so on, but I'm not so sure whether they're all stitched in properly into it all, and then maybe those organisations linking with their local groups where the enthusiasm is and so on, and let's say the whole community connection is. I think that there's a sort of a joining up needed. And also, I would say about local authorities, there hasn't been that much talk here about local authorities. PPN, yes, but I honestly think that there needs to be, we talked about champions and so on, but I think there needs to be a person at a local authority level who is the person you identify that's driving this, right? Because if you think of county managers and directors of services and so on, I'm not sure how often you would hear them talking about this issue. You know, and the people in the communities need leadership, and there's national leadership we talked about, but also there's local leadership, and it just can't be people, community people. It needs to be also people in the public service. You know, and maybe there's a need for some of the funding to go towards, how to put it, having that energy, for want of a better word, sort of invested in somebody to actually carry that message throughout the local community, throughout, and link with all the players, the farmers, the businesses, the householders, etc., in a particular county council area.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Michael Lucknow, and I was a member of the Citizens' Assembly, and in terms of trying to make it relevant to at community level, I think a more high-level consideration needs to be taken into account. There was lots of very impressive, optimistic, encouraging words spoken by the politicians today, and it was interestingly symbolic the way they walked off the stage then and are gone. There's a document. Apologies. All right. No. Symbolic. Okay. Symbolically, I'm talking about. Just try and let me make my point. What I'm trying to say is that we've seen long-term plans before, and for them to work at a community level, they need to be translated. A long-term plan, which is here 2040, needs to be translated into medium-term targets. Medium-term targets need to be translated into short-term targets, ones that can be measured, ones that are meaningful. And when they are meaningful, every community around the country, it'll make more sense to them. And they can see year on year whether we're meeting them. We're never going to meet whatever the targets are for 2040 if we just put the brochure together now, and we'll come back to it in 2039. We saw what happened with 2020 targets, and it looks like we're going to miss our 2030 targets. I'm wondering, long before we get to 2040, will we be making another document, putting it together for making Ireland great in 2060? It has to be more meat on the thing, and it has to be show more purpose. there was some encouraging words being spoken this morning, but there's a lot more that needs to be actually proven before anybody's going to really believe them, based on the track record that we have and based on the overwhelming evidence that we heard in the Citizens' Assembly. There's a lot of very disappointed people in the leaders of our country, and leadership was mentioned. Leadership is required, but it has to be proven and has to be done.
Okay, thank you. Now, before we have the next question, and because I just want to make sure there's mics ready for the next questions, I think there's a comment there about translation. First of all, we talk about you can't just have short-term targets, you need to have long-term aspirations, but it is around translating those long-term aspirations into deliverables on a short and medium-term basis, which kind of links me back to Anna, you talking about kind of scaling up and scaling out, and maybe just reflecting on maybe some of the challenges that were reflected there around trying to get things done, but then also this dichotomy that we keep saying you have to be long-term, but then how do you make sure things actually happen?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to a number of points that have already been made by the panel. I mean, the new social contract, this notion of climate action being a moral obligation and not just in the national interest, requires trust. It requires the ability for all sides to take action, and not just governments and civil society and grassroots community actions, but also the private sector and innovating responsibly for the kind of products that we need. And all of those things will need to come together. There's no kind of silver bullet kind of response to this, but we absolutely must make short-term interventions which don't preclude us from meeting those long-term goals, and that's the crucial point.
And is there anything, back to kind of the topic around engaging of communities, is there anything around the engagement piece? Trust is mentioned a lot here. Is there anything in that space?
Well, certainly empowering communities as citizen consumers to feel that they have the ability to demand green products, sustainable products, low carbon, zero carbon products that they consume. Going back to my area of expertise around sustainable consumptions, it's clear that we need to consume differently, and that may ultimately mean consuming better but less. And I think that this is something that people don't really want to grapple with, because it does seem to come at odds with some of the questions that were raised earlier around economic growth and environmental protection. And we have to face them, we have to have those hard discussions, and we need to be honest about the complexities and difficulties that we face and think about how we wish to live collectively as a society.
Now, I know that Mark has the microphone here, and then there's a lady in the audience there. So we'll start with Mark.
Thanks very much, Laura. And I've been dying to get in for a few minutes based on some of the remarks I've heard. Just to come back on the point that our colleague made a few moments ago, to actually get a Taoiseach and 5 ministers in a room for a morning is not an easy thing to do. Given the extent of business that all of them have to discharge in the national interest, and we have Minister Donoghue and Minister Naughton still with us this morning. I suppose, like, wearing the hat of central government, we're actually very humble people, and we know what we know and we know what we don't know. And one of the areas that we struggle with as officials is how we make that connection between what has been done in the centre and what is happening at local level. And there's an awful lot of good work that has been done that we are supporting. There's a lot of good work being done by the SEAI, for example, on the Sustainable Communities Initiative. I think the commitment in the programme for government to establish the National Dialogue on Climate Action is really, really important, and we are absolutely serious about it. And I think the first series of meetings that you'll see this weekend will afford us a great opportunity to see what we are doing and what we can do, and how we mobilise the communities and action right across the country. And the bit that I'm interested in is how we harness the good things that are being done, because there are a lot of things happening in different parts of the country being run by different organisations, and how we can synthesise that, put it together, and come up with, you can't make it uniform right across the country, but how you can come up with models of good thinking and make sure that what is happening on the ground can be sustained and developed right across the country. Just in terms of some of the things we're doing, and it was mentioned to put the community to the fore. I mean, a big part of the Renewable Electricity Support Scheme, which the Minister will announce shortly, will be about how we enable communities. I mean, we've had a lot of pushback over the last few years about the impact of wind energy developments and so on, but how we enable communities, make them part of the development, how the community can benefit and all of that, I think will be an important element. We are joined up in government. I mean, sometimes it doesn't appear that way, but we have structures in place. Cabinet obviously come together, engaged in climate matters on a regular basis. I'm not breaking any cabinet secrets by saying there was a very extensive discussion last week on renewable energy. We have a cabinet committee that looks almost exclusively at climate action, which comprises the key ministers, including the ministers that were with us this morning. We have a senior officials group. We'll have the work of the National Dialogue in climate action. And there is a steering group that Minister Naughton chairs on how we implement the National Mitigation Plan. I think what we've seen in the system over the last couple of years in particular is the importance of engagement with community. And if you talk to any politician who was out campaigning in the 2016 general election, we're dealing with communities that are hugely active, hugely enabled, hugely understanding of the issues that need to be dealt with. And government is responding to that. One of the questioners talked about policy alignment and the challenges that you face in dealing with the climate change issue when you're faced with issues in agriculture and transport, for example. But it's not easy to affect change in these areas. I mean, when you talk about agriculture, you're talking about food security. When you're talking about transport, you're talking about one of the biggest challenges in the transport sector is the freight sector. You have a freight sector who's now having to deal with the challenges around Brexit and the additional costs that are being imposed, the increase in fuel prices. So these are not simple issues. And if there's a sense that there is an action, it's wrong, but it is not easy to get to a situation when you're dealing with these sectors, and indeed the energy sector as well, that you can come up with easy answers. I mean, we have a national mitigation plan which deals with a whole range of these. We have a commitment to investment in the NVP for about 8 billion in agriculture, or 8 billion in transport, 4 billion in agriculture. So we are working hard in the centre to deal with these issues. We understand them, but the solutions are not straightforward. As regards a subsidy for solar, one of the things we have to bear in mind is the cost effectiveness of the various technologies. There is a desire and a need to diversify. Most of our renewable energy has come from wind over the last decade or so. We accept that there are newer technologies that are coming down the tracks. The subsidy level required is decreasing, and we're actually near the end of a very detailed process around the delivery of the renewable electricity support scheme. So I suppose what I wanted to say as a representative of the system, for want of a better term, is we are absolutely alert to all of this. We're working really, really hard on it. The bit that we really want to get a sense from yourselves and the other participants today is how we crack the community and citizen engagement element, and how we get better at that, how we mobilise it, how we fund it, and how we can, and we often talk about it in the department, I mean, what you need to have in our society in 2050 is, and it'll mean turning society on its head. We're going to have to socialise differently, we're going to have to move about more differently, and we're going to have to heat our homes differently. And that change has to be effected at local level.
Thanks, Mark. There's a lady who has a microphone, and I'm going to, I think there should be another microphone there, and I'm going to take those two, and then we'll go back to the panel. So, sorry, the lady in the blue jacket.
Hello. Yeah, my name is Ivo Pocock. I live in Tipperary, and I'm involved in a sustainable energy community there. But I also work for ECOLES, which is the European network of community-led initiatives for climate change and sustainability. So I suppose I wanted to reflect a little bit wider on a European level to say that the kind of conversations that we're having here today are happening all around Europe, and that there are thousands of communities around Europe who are taking action on the ground to affect change for climate change and sustainability. And we're working at a European policy level to bring the voice of communities to policymakers at European level, but also national and regional level to look at ways, exactly what you're talking about, how can government and how can taxpayers' funding be used to support communities in a real way. So in our flagship event is on the 22nd of September. It's the second edition of the European Day of Sustainable Communities. Last year it was celebrated in 14 countries around Europe. And this year we're hoping to grow it. As part of that, we're co-hosting a conference in Brussels with the European Economic and Social Committee. And the theme is citizens and municipalities, local authorities collaborating for change. Just to say as well that one of the things we're doing is compiling a status report of academic research that is looking at exactly this issue of how to support community-led initiatives, and that will be published in January. But I suppose coming back to Ireland and with my kind of local hat on, I think we can't get away from the fact that the issue of a lack of to date of a feed-in tariff is a real issue. And I suppose I think it was in the early hours of last Friday in Brussels, the deal on the new renewable energy targets, although they're pretty paltry, was hammered out. There was a really unique inclusion in that deal, in that trialogue deal, of a recognition of the right of citizens to produce their own electricity, to produce and store their own energy, to be so-called prosumers. And I know this was largely the result of campaigning by Friends of the Earth Europe. And community energy initiatives are all around Europe. Anybody who's been to Germany, you could look at the figures. There are solar panels on everybody's roofs. So I know you said that it's not for this panel, but I think in terms of trying to identify some of the barriers to communities, you're keen to find out how do we engage communities. I know I was involved in helping get BEC funding for solar panels on 9 household roofs in my neighbourhood. If you were able to offer a feed-in tariff, if we could set up an energy co-op and not be treated like the ESB or electricity in terms of how much we have to pay to join the grid. I'm really just about to finish. But I think this is a real block to communities engaging. Communities want to engage. So I really would. Germany did it, and they gave a massive kickstart to the solar PV.
Okay. Liam, just any closing words from the members of the panel? Liam, from yourself, and kind of, I suppose, any further reflections you might have, just a quick reflection.
Very briefly, yeah, I agree, the feed-in tariff, it should be happening. It isn't happening, so the sooner the better. What I would say is about in communities investing in bigger projects locally. That is not happening in Ireland, really. You have developer-led wind turbines and solar farms. Whereas my understanding is in Denmark, it's completely different. Farmers get together and communities get together and invest in local wind projects, solar projects. So why are the structures not enabling that to happen in Ireland? And communities would feel part of their local renewable energy facility then. Anyway, that's just, it's a structural issue, I think, and the way business is structured in Ireland, So, and finally, I'd say just, I would put it, going back to collaboration of, I suppose, a lot of players in local areas around this, and I'm sure from the climate dialogue, maybe in Athlone, there will be more effort locally to join dots around all of this, because there's a lot of good things happening, but it seems to be disjointed. And I would say, somebody mentioned about where can all the good stories be seen. I think Spark Change, the Wheel, have a website, sparkchange.ie, and they're going around the country and putting up some of these stories around sustainability, and in particular around low carbon initiatives. The Aran Islands, for example, is an excellent example, I think, where great work has been done around low carbon.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you very much. Elaine?
Yeah, and I suppose just to follow on, I think there are lots of initiatives that are happening. I think it's fine that there's lots of initiatives happening, and I think it's good, I suppose, in a way that you do get that organic nature. So it's not necessarily that you want the same happening everywhere, but that you can have diversity, and I suppose to be happy with the diversity, and if it works, I suppose. I think in terms of maybe communities and barriers, I think it's really important that we ask communities why, and people why they don't engage. I think that's so important, and I think if there are barriers there, I think we need to identify them, and if ownership of energy is one of those barriers, then I think that will come up in those conversations, and that will come out in those conversations. I mean, I think when I think of Ireland, and I think of as I say, we work with young people. I mean, we have a very young country, and I suppose just from a hopeful perspective, Ireland has been a leader. It's shown itself as a leader in the last few years, and we've had I suppose we've had 2 votes in the last 2 to 3 years, which have been pushed really very much by our young people. And I think working with young people, we know that they want change. We know that they want that they identify climate change as an urgent issue, and they want things to happen. And I think in a way, we need to trust in our young people as well, and to move forward, and to see the urgency, and to move forward with that urgency.
Thank you. And the national dialogue, again,
Absolutely.
will hopefully facilitate more of this type of discussion.
Yeah, I mean, that is what the national dialogue... I mean, the national dialogue is happening. The first event is happening on Saturday. That's going to be the first of 4 regional events that's happening throughout the country. And then coming from that, there will be... the idea is that there'll be local initiatives and local events as well, so that there will be a framework in place whereby people can feed into local, feed that local into regional, and that regional then feeding into national as well.
Justin, from your side.
Yeah, to pull back to the theme of community participation, I think there's 3 things that are needed to help communities to participate. And the first one is they have to be allowed to participate. They have to be invited, and they have to be invited at the right time. If we look at the Aarhus Convention, which Ireland, of course, is a signatory of, people have to be asked, when all the options are on the table. They have to be in there at the start. They have to be invited. The second thing is they need support. Voluntary organisations, communities, they're doing this in their spare time. They have day jobs, they have children, they have families, they have all sorts of other things pulling at their resources. The PPN network, and I think the reason the PPN network is becoming a success is because it's being funded, and it's being funded quite well. Obviously, it needs lots more funding, but communities need support in order to be able to do a proper response. And the last thing is they need time. Again, it's back to this. You have a day job, you have family, you have children who have to go to training or go to whatever it is, and responses have to be fitted in to whatever spare time you can manage to eke out. So you need time to respond, and I know we have problems with the Strategic Infrastructure Bill, and they're trying to shorten the amount of time there are for people to respond on it. That won't work. Communities need time. It's a very slow process. You have communities that have to go back to their own committees to agree a position. People need time. So those 3 things: you have to be invited, you have to be supported, and you have to have time to respond.
Thank you. Those are very, very clear. Anna, last words to you.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I suppose just to follow on, really, it's about the kind of social dimensions and social sustainability. I just want to reiterate that citizen engagement is not a once-off project. It's a process, and it has to become embedded in our systems. Citizens need to see the benefits. They need to be recognised as innovators and entrepreneurs at the community level, in the same way that start-up high-tech entrepreneurs would be through Enterprise Island and the like. They need protected spaces to experiment, to try different ways of approaching this complex programme, which we do not have a single solution for. So we need a just transition, and that means investing in training for green jobs, innovation support for low-carbon enterprises, including social enterprises and community groups.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the panel, and I think they've done, we could be here all day talking, and I know there was lots of other questions and queries, but it just shows the level of interest, and I really would like to thank the panel members for all of their input today, and we've more post-coffee break. So first of all, before I hand over to Brian, I just would like to thank all of the panel members.